title is Comforting a Grieving Friend. And here to help me discuss this topic, I have Joe and David Morton in the studio. Welcome, panelists.
Okay.
Hello, hello.
Joe, this is not an easy topic to talk about, but it is one that is, of course, very important. And many people, including myself, really, we don't want to think about this, but we need to know what to do when we are in this situation.
That's right. And it can be very difficult, and no one enjoys having to comfort a grieving friend, but it's a part of life, and it's a skill set that I think many of us, and times even myself, I think we can lack that skill. Yeah. And then you can sort of hurt the relationship, that friendship or, that brother-sister relationship, if you don't know what to do or how to respond to someone else being in grieving.
Many times in these kinds of situations, we are at a loss. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. And maybe we overthink things, actually, because we are not accustomed to being in those situations. So in our deck, David, it says it's okay to not know what to say to a grieving friend. Showing up is enough. And this is a relief, I think, for those who are trying to comfort a grieving friend, that you don't have to have this magical phrase, but just be there, right? That's really the main point of this article today.
Yeah, and I think this is an important article because being able to comfort and go through hard times with someone is something that I think can make us feel this is going to sound strange, but make us feel more human because it puts everything about life into perspective.
It does. Yeah, there are many things that put life in perspective. Maybe a health scare can make you think, oh, what's really important, right? Or, of course, if you lose a family member or a close friend, that puts life in perspective because, Joe, many times we're focused on things that aren't that important.
Right. We're often spending time thinking about schedules, events, calendars, finances. And those things can be important.
Sure.
Those things in their own right are important, but there are bigger things out there, larger moments that happen. It gives you a moment of pause.
All right. Well, thank you guys for sharing in this opening. Right now we are on page 44. If you have your magazine, please open it up. And right now we'll have our first reading for today.
Comforting a grieving friend. It's okay to not know what to say to a grieving friend. Showing up is enough. I have read time and again in spiritual or wellness literature about empathy being a process that involves putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and allowing ourselves to connect with the thing in us that understands their pain. I have constructed lectures around healthy communication and the empathic process. Yet, when it was my turn to practice empathy, it was incredibly difficult. I felt powerless over someone else's pain, like I didn't have a purpose if I couldn't make them feel better at that moment. I felt frustrated at not knowing that perfect thing to say. Then it occurred to me, what if there is nothing we could possibly say to make their pain go away? What if we miss our opportunities for genuine empathy by trying to fix someone else's emotional pain or quicken the grieving process?
All right, so we start off talking about empathy. What is empathy, Joe?
So empathy is that ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in their situation. We often talk about putting yourself in someone's shoes. And empathy is that deep kind of sense of feeling where you're almost feeling the same emotions or going through that same experience.
A bit different from sympathy, right?
That's right. I was actually thinking about the difference between empathy and sympathy before we started today's program. Often sympathy is like, oh, I feel bad for you, or, that's too bad. Whereas empathy kind of goes a step deeper, I think.
It does. That's just what I was thinking. It goes a step further, and it's like, I feel your pain. Right? So the lady who wrote this, her name is Hannah Rose from the Baltimore Sun, and she says that I've read time and again in spiritual or wellness literature. So, of course, we know what spiritual literature is and maybe something religious. And then what is wellness literature?
Wellness just has to do, in this case, particularly with, mental health, right? It has to do with living a healthy lifestyle, both in body and soul. It tends to
It could be
wellness.
talking about something physical, right? You want to be whole, you want to be well. So we have the word wellness. And she's read about empathy and the process involved. And then we have a phrase that links with being empathetic, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I love this idiom. It kind of sounds funny, but it's a lovely idiom to know, Joe.
That's right. So it's imagining yourself in someone's situation, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, seeing it from their perspective. There's another really good idiom with shoes, talking about walking a mile in someone else's shoes that I like.
Yeah, it just means that, kind of experience what they've experienced, right?
That's right.
And this involves some intentionality. That word comes up a lot, being intentional, because we have to stop and think and, what is this person going through and how can I help? What do they really need? You're not there to fix the situation, as we'll talk about later, but you're trying to love them in the way that they need to be loved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think intentionality is a really great word to use in this circumstance. I was thinking about that word intentionality just the other night. I was sharing with a friend about it, and intentionality is interesting because you're always going to be intentional about something, right? The question is what you're going to be intentional about. So in this case, when we're talking about intentionality, we're talking about being intentionally loving to someone who's going through a difficult time. So that means, if you're walking a mile in someone's shoes, for example, that means instead of just trying to fix someone's problem, or instead of just, kind of looking down and saying, oh, you have such a bad life, I'm sorry about that. Instead, how can you come beside that person, right? And walk through this trial with them instead of just trying to pull them out of it so that you feel more comfortable.
Right. Very good point. Well, she goes on and says, I have constructed lectures around healthy communication and the empathetic process. Yet when it was my turn to participate, it was incredibly difficult. Isn't that true, Joe? A lot of times it's easy to teach something, but it's much different to live that out.
Oh, absolutely. And so I can totally relate where maybe you're giving the theory of something, and then when it comes your turn to do it, all of a sudden you've forgotten the lessons that you've taught others.
When the rubber meets the road, right?
Right.
When
the rubber
real
meets
life
the road.
circumstances.
I think of people who have taught me a lot about patience, and then they lose their cool when they're waiting in line. It's that sort of, right, you're right. When the practical issue comes up, the theory runs away.
It happens all the time. Theory is easy to talk about, but it's hard to put things into practice. So here, she felt powerless over someone else's pain. And I think that's okay. Like, we can't solve the person's problem. We can help them along the journey, as David was just talking about. And she goes on, she says, it's like she didn't have a purpose if she couldn't make them feel better at the moment. Joe, a lot of times we want to fix other people's problems, and that's not always our role.
That's right. And, I think about in marriage and being a husband, I like being the fixer. The wife comes to me with a problem and I have the solution. And that's not always the case. And sometimes having that fixer role is the exact wrong thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it oftentimes is more harmful than helpful because when someone comes to you with a problem and before you're asked, you immediately assume the role of the fixer, like, oh, I'm going to solve your problem. What you've done essentially is you've taken the whole situation and you've made it about you. Now it's no longer about helping that person to walk through this hard time. It's about you feeling better about the fact that, that you have to see this person go through this by doing something about it so that you can feel better about their problem.
She's talking about she wants to feel purpose in this, or, how can she help? But you're right, David, that the focus really shouldn't be on us. It should be on the other person what they need. And she says she felt frustrated and not knowing that perfect thing to say. Joe, sometimes we want just the right thing to say, but that's, again, not really the point.
Absolutely. You're looking for that one magical sentence that will make the other person feel better, stop crying, stop freaking out, and just move on. You know?
You want to hurry this up, right?
Right. Stop grieving. We've got other things to do.
Yeah. But it can be a really long process, especially if you lost someone that's close to you. And then something occurred to her. David, what was that?
So it occurred to her that if we miss our opportunities for genuine empathy by trying to fix someone else's emotional pain, we might be missing an opportunity to grow in ourselves and help them actually recover from whatever just devastated them.
All right. And so there's nothing that you could actually say to make the pain go away, right? It's not about what you are saying. It's not really about you so much as just they need someone there to listen to them and not necessarily fix their problem. And it's a process that we have to go through. It's called the grieving process, and it takes time.
It does. And the grieving process is something that with a lot of ups and downs. There are moments where you feel like you're over a situation, and then all of a sudden it's almost like you snap back into feeling a lot of sorrow or pain or anger. And actually, I think it's a good moment to remind listeners that the grieving process isn't just about someone being dead, someone dying and passing on. There are lots of situations, I think, where grieving happens. You know, I think about many moons ago when I was a younger man and, you know, I had broken up with someone, not my wife. My wife and I are doing great. I was early days. And it was a long relationship. It was maybe like 4 years through college. And when that broke off, you know, it was very difficult. And I had somebody, it was actually my professor, who reminded me that, you know, even a relationship ending can start up this sort of grieving process because it's a loss.
Yeah.
It's not just death.
That's a close relationship over a long period.
Right.
Yeah. And there's an element of death to that as well. There's a whole way of life. There's a whole part of you that came alive with that person that is now going to disappear or change in some way, you know? And you're losing it. It's going to die, right?
Right. So just to say, you know, if you have friends around you who are experiencing things that you think to yourself, maybe that's not grieving, you know, still be patient and listen.
Something else to think about is maybe you don't know what someone else is going through. We don't always know what is going on in everyone's life. And so that's a reminder to us to, you know, be kind and be patient with people. And you never know how that will help them as well. Of course, in certain situations, you know that someone is grieving, but just a general principle that we don't always know what someone's going through. So stop and be kind, smile, and just be considerate, because people could be going through something tough, and that can help them out as well by just giving them grace. Well, next we're talking about being present. So let's learn about that as we go to our next reading for today.
Being present. Rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection, says Brené Brown, a research professor at the University of Houston who studies empathy. All I needed to do was show up and listen, and become comfortable with the silence of not being able to fully understand someone else's pain in that moment. If you love someone who is currently in emotional pain or grieving, it's natural to want to make their pain go away. But you cannot take that process away from them. We grow through pain. We cultivate resilience through walking directly into the pain and coming out on the other side.
All right, we hear from a research professor here, Brené Brown, and she says, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. And I really love this because it emphasizes connection with people. And it's a beautiful thing that you're close enough to someone that you can help them during this difficult situation, that means you have a close friend. And that is a beautiful thing. And so connection is important. How can we have stronger relationships, better connections, and really just pour into people, whether it's during the grieving process or just walking through the journey of life together?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Actually, a few years ago, I lost a very close friend. And during that time, one thing I remember that really helped all of us, because it was it was a group of friends, of all of us together. We were all very close. We lost, this guy was pretty much my brother in a lot of ways. But one of the ways we helped each other grieve as a group is we would just, I guess, remember the days after it happened, after we had the memorial service, we would just kind of sit in a room together, and sometimes we wouldn't be talking. Sometimes someone might be playing a guitar softly or something, but we would just be there in the room together. And just knowing we were together and that we all knew and we all had memories, we were all going through some level of, grief and remembrance was so helpful just to be there together.
Right. And, when we're in these situations, the awkward silence can be hard, but I think we have to work through that and just show up and listen, as we see here in the next paragraph. She says, the writer, all I needed to do was show up and listen and become comfortable with the silence. For me, I don't really like the awkward silence, but in this situation, we have to leave space, leave room for people, and not try to just rush in and fix it, and just be there with them.
That's right. And I was looking up some of Brene Brown's material, and she has some very wonderful TED Talks if you're curious about learning more. And something that really struck me, she had this sentence, and, you hear some bad news or you hear about something your friend is going through, and you want to say something at first, but you don't know what to say, like, oh, I totally understand, is probably not the right sentence. But she suggests something like, I don't know what to say, but I'm glad you told me. And then just let the silence kind of come in and sit together.
Yeah.
And I thought a sentence like that was so good because it recognizes that you don't have the answer, but also emphasizes the connection that the two of you share.
Yeah, and I think the point is here, it's okay you don't have the answer. We don't always have the answers, but just being there is the point, that they have someone there. If, they want to talk through something or just sit with you, then that is really going to help them a lot. And so the top of the next column, it says, if you love someone who is currently in emotional pain or grieving, it's natural to want to make their pain go away. But again, this is a process, the grieving process, and this is something that each person has to go through, and it will be maybe different for every person. Like it may last a long time or a shorter time for someone else, but it's a process that they have to work through, and we can't do that for other people, and they can't do it for us.
Yeah, very true. We have to give people space to go through those things. And when I was reading this article, it reminded me of something in Scripture. Someone can check me. I forget exactly where, but I remember it says, about comforting people. You have to grieve with those who grieve and rejoice with those who rejoice. Right? I think when I think about what does that mean? Grieving with those who grieve. If you lost someone, or if a friend of yours lost someone, maybe they lost a family member or a friend, maybe you didn't lose anyone. Maybe you don't remember ever losing someone the way that they just lost someone, but you still know that death is an evil thing, and even though it's natural, it's not good, right? For someone to be gone. So you can grieve with someone in that way because you can at least know that they're going through something that is inevitable, but is also like an ugly part of life. And you can grieve with them through that, not trying to say that you feel the same thing, but just being with them, and they're grieving, and you can be grieving with them through that process.
And just being a really good friend, right? And just helping them in the ways that they need. And we also grow in these experiences, of course. In these painful experiences, we can grow a lot. And that's kind of the beauty and the pain, right? It's not easy, but the growth that you experience, of course, is good. And what is also beautiful about this is when you've lost someone, well, you know how that feels. And then when your friend loses someone, you know how to better help them. And so this can apply to all struggles in life. Whatever struggle that you are facing, when you conquer that, you are then better able to help someone else going through that same struggle. So be encouraged. If you're struggling with something now, well, in the future, you can hopefully help someone else who is struggling with that, and that can give a lot of hope as well. So we grow through pain, and then we cultivate resilience. I love that, Joe. That word cultivate and then resilience, putting those together.
Right. So cultivating resilience, going through difficult situations and being able to return to a previous good condition. You know, when I see resilience, it's that kind of ability to, you know, work through a situation and maintain yourself. And I think that's definitely true when going through pain. And it's true. Brandon, you had mentioned we go through these experiences, and when we come out the other side, and as we see other people go through not the same experience, but similar experiences, we're far better equipped to be there and to listen because we've felt those similar emotions.
Yes. And I like that she says here, you're walking directly into the pain. And a lot of times we try to avoid pain. Sometimes we can't. But there may be situations in our lives that we do not want to deal with. But actually, that's not what we need to do. We need to deal with it and walk through the pain and then come out on the other side, and we'll grow through that process and we'll be better for it. And so that's something that we can take away regardless of the struggle that we are facing. Well, as we come to our last reading today, we're going to learn more about how to help. So let's stay tuned for our reading, and we'll continue our discussion about comforting a grieving friend.
How to help. So, what if instead of avoiding someone because you know you can't make it better or say the right thing, you simply show up and hold space for their emotional experience? If you love someone who is grieving, know that you are doing everything you can do by simply being there, by listening, holding space, and allowing yourself to be silent with vulnerability between you. It will make a difference.
All right, so we don't need to avoid people. Maybe we can't make it better. Maybe we can't say the right thing. And because we think those things, we may say, oh, I just want to stay away. I don't want to try and help because I don't know what to do. Well, that's not the best decision. What should we do instead, David?
Well, you can simply show up, and I like this phrase, hold space for their emotional experience. I love that phrase because it presents your role in that situation as that of a servant, right? Like they have a lot of baggage. They have a lot of weight. And you show up so that you can just help them hold that weight.
Yeah.
You know, and like you're not there to take it away because you can't. You're just there to help them endure it.
So we all have burdens, and if we have a friend coming alongside of us to help us carry that, well, that is a beautiful picture of friendship and how we can truly be a good friend.
Right. I actually was very interested in this term, hold space. This was actually my first time encountering it.
Yeah, me too, I think.
And it's interesting because as you search through this term and where it came from and what does it mean, I like that somebody described it as just being an emotional bucket, where you allow someone's emotions to just sort of pour out on you and you just catch that. And how holding space is this sort of art of listening, but also being aware of your own emotions and your own feelings and thoughts and how that might impact your ability to listen.
And we have to change the way we normally do things in our fast-paced society. You know, we're not used to holding space. We have very little space, we feel like, and we're busy. And so this is the opposite of how we normally operate. We have to slow down, stop, listen. And I think just stop and think before you react is a good advice as well, because we can often just speak without thinking. In these kinds of situations, it's better to stop and really make sure that what we're saying is necessary and helpful. Well, if you love someone who is grieving, know that you are doing everything you can do by simply being there, by listening, holding space, and allowing yourself to be silent with the vulnerability between you. And I want to talk about this word vulnerability. It comes up a lot. Of course, the term vulnerable or vulnerability is a noun. If you are being vulnerable, that means that you kind of you're letting down your guard, so to speak, and that means you can be hurt emotionally or, of course, physically. But when we're using it in this case, we're talking about you could be hurt emotionally in your heart, right? And that doesn't feel good, but being vulnerable is especially important in relationships, Joe.
Right. And if we're constantly having our guard up, we're not able to really engage in, I think, a very healthy dialogue, or that connection is sort of burdened by our desire to appear strong to others.
Yeah, right. And so it's good to let down our guard, and especially with close friends. We don't need to do that with every single person in the world. But again, making those close connections. And so I think one thing we can take away from this article is we need people. Friendship is important. Community is important. We aren't meant to live lives on our own. We're not an island. And so we need to connect with other people who care for us and love us and have that community, that support there. And, it's important to have that. And, many of us here at Studio Classroom, we also call on God for help in these situations. And for us, He is the one who can help us the most, but He also uses people to help us along the journey. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our last article in November, our commentary article. Next month, we start off with another serious subject. We're not trying to be serious all the time, but these topics are important. We will be talking about the serious subject of suicide. So if you know anyone who is struggling with that, please invite them to tune in and also read the article. We hope to be a help to those who are struggling. Thanks for joining us this month. Until next time, this is Brandon.
And David.
And Joe.
Saying goodbye.
See you later.